Well, welcome, Al Cavalieri. I love calling you Alex too. If some of you know him in the game, he has been called Alex, but now he's Al Cavalieri, and he is from CION Investments and one of the badass men in my life, and I had to share him with all of you. So welcome to your Badass podcast. I am so excited to share your journey with everyone, Al.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be on it and pumped to be chatting with you again. It's been a minute.
It has been a minute, but it always feels like we just saw each other yesterday, especially with the Instagram follow.
Yeah, exactly. Got to be on the ground.
Well, I would love for you to share with my listeners, how you came to where you are today and just a little bit about your background so they understand, your journey a little bit.
Yeah, of course. And, it's interesting when I tell the story of my background. I've had a pretty, I would say, non-traditional route to where I am today. So I run marketing for CION Investments. I've been in marketing for a number of years now, but didn't start in marketing originally. So my career, it was interesting. When I was leaving college back in 2010, I went to Syracuse. And I made, most of the friends that I made in school were from the Long Island area. They were from the New York area. They were from the New Jersey area. So I decided, instead of going back to Michigan, which where I'm originally from, I would take my shots in New York. So I was like, Mom, Dad, I'm moving to New York City. They were like, great. Do you have a job? I was like, well, don't have a job, but we're gonna make that leap and try to figure it out when we get there. And at that point, a lot of people in school already had jobs lined up or already had internships. I played lacrosse and was focused on athletics, so I wasn't the most career-oriented college student. So I ended up moving to New York City. First 2 months in being here in New York, I was trying to find a job. I basically would have taken any job that would have came across my plate, but I ended up landing on the sales desk of a headhunting shop. And it was interesting because I still till this day tell everybody that it was the best learning experience in my life because, if you don't know anything about headhunting, you're calling 100 people a day, cold calls 90% of the time. You're emailing another 200. So you're trial by fire and you're learning rejection extremely fast. I joined that company, which was Workbridge Associates, did headhunting for startups in New York City, which it was a great market at the time, 2010, a lot of VC money. A lot of startups were doing a ton of hiring. So I ended up, actually getting out of the gates pretty quickly at that company. Was one of the top salespeople there. But it was a smaller firm. It was a grind of all grinds. I said to myself, I wanted to experience getting into a bigger firm, and just getting experience with a name brand, whether it be in finance, whether it be in tech or something or other. And I ended up talking to a friend who worked at BlackRock. And they loved it there. They really enjoyed their experience there so far. They're in the institutional business. And so I ended up passing my resume through them. I knew that I couldn't move from a headhunting / recruiting into a marketing role, which I started to skew that way because I got one of my biggest clients as a headhunter through Twitter. It was like something where, you didn't expect it, particularly in 2010, but the guy would never pick up my phone calls. But then one day I was like, you know what? I gotta search for this guy, more about this guy's background. Mark O'Neill, if he ever listens to this, so I tweeted him and and that's how I got my first client. So I started to, catch on to this marketing thing, but I knew I couldn't transition from being a recruiter to in a particular marketing role unless I, took a marketing role at another small firm, which I wanted to get into a bigger firm naturally first.
Sure.
So ended up interviewing for a campus recruiting job at BlackRock. And so that was a lot of events, going to a lot of events and representing the firm from a BlackRock perspective. And then I ended up getting hired for that as a contract worker. So I wasn't a full-time worker, which it gets interesting as the story goes. But it was within the first 30 days I was there, they came to the team. The head of the group came to the team and he said, we need to rebuild our campus recruiting website, and we need to, start to build a social media presence for BlackRock as it relates to recruiting. And, I was like, okay, this is like my end. I was like, I got to take advantage of this. So I raised my hand, ended up getting that project, leading that project in partnership with the head of brand and some other folks within the marketing organization. And I met a bunch of folks in marketing. I worked on that project for like 6 to 8 months. And then, I leveraged that into a role within the retirement marketing space, where I worked for a couple of years, particularly on the digital side. And I started to fall in love with just digital in general, the elements of how a website plays into your marketing, how a website plays into your brand, and falling in love with other elements of promotional channels outside of social, such as paid search, email, etc. And then, so I was in retirement marketing for, 2 years. And then, it seems so long ago. And then ended up transitioning into the digital organization specifically, even though I was already working on digital stuff. And I was there for a number of years. And I recently left last year to go run marketing for CION Investments, which is where I am now. Still living in New York City.
Yeah, for now.
Yeah.
What I love about your journey, Al, is that, you first took a leap of faith in yourself, right? After college, and jumping into an unknown, but having faith in yourself that you'd make it happen no matter what is something, that's how I approached my career when I kicked things off too. And I graduated college and I was like, I'm going to go figure it out in San Francisco. I was in Washington, DC, and ended up in San Francisco initially. And so I could totally relate to that grind when you get somewhere new and you're like, I'm just going to see what I can learn. And how great it is that you landed on recruiting, because I think it's the most complex industry out there. When you're needing to represent individuals to be placed into a company, you're like representing both sides and you're trying to find this like perfect match. And it's so challenging because you're dealing with personalities all over the place, right? And that learning, as you now are at CION and building the brand and relaunching your brand, and as the head of marketing, like taking it to the next level, that people understanding, I'm sure you had at the beginning of your career, is actually what backs most brand story, interaction that you have, right? Like, would you say that that's a fundamental skill to manage?
Agree. And I think it's a couple of things. I think one of which is, the relationship aspect of sales. And I tell everyone this is, if you can get into a sales job at one point in your career, like everyone I tell who's still in college, I chat with about career advice, or a business development role, that just teaches you not only one, it flat out teaches you rejection, because the door closed 8 out of 10 times, but it also teaches you how to build relationships, maintain relationships, and it starts to, and that was great on the recruiting side, is that it allowed me to understand how people start to work and understand how these different teams need to come together to create a cohesive strategy and a cohesive process. And that was something I really learned as a headhunter, in addition to the sales aspect, was just, figuring out what are people's mindsets like when they are looking for someone to bring into their company, which now as a head of a group, it's super, it comes full circle, because you got to think that way when you're making decisions about your own team. So that was it. I completely agree. It's definitely an element that goes into that bleeds throughout the whole career. And, when I moved into campus recruiting and being in that role at BlackRock, being in a people-oriented role, very heavily people-oriented role for, the first year plus maybe of my career, it really allowed me to build relationships with senior folks within the firm very quickly. Mm-hmm. And as a 22-year-old kid. So that was one of those things where, you learn to interact and present and be around senior people very early on in your career. So I was lucky to be able to fall into that as well.
Yeah, that exposure helps, because that relational element that you were talking about is how you build teams. It's how you, step up into leadership. It's how you connect with those who are more senior than you to figure out, well, how do I even get to where you are, So it's really cool that you had the opportunity, at such a young age to flex those muscles. And it sounds like, you really didn't have any qualms with risk, like jumped in full.
Didn't then. I mean, now would be a different story. But the idea, it was really, it was scrappy. It was mm-hmm. When I ended up the headhunting job to BlackRock, to navigating my way within a big firm like BlackRock. It was just trying to build as many relationships as I could, try to figure out where the pockets are. So it was a scrappy risk-taking effort, I'd say.
Yeah, but it rewards you when you do that, right? Each lesson learned. As you think about the younger version of yourself and now where you are, what advice would you potentially give that version of you?
Don't overthink things. And, I think a lot of the time, particularly because we're such a social media heavy world, that you tend to overthink either what you're doing on a day-to-day basis or where your career is going to go in 3 to 5 years, when you have no idea. I had no idea, like where I am now or where I even was 3 years ago. I couldn't have told you that when I was 21. I thought I'd be back in Michigan working for my dad. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one, don't overthink things. And I think it's learn from your micro mistakes. I think, I think there's two ways you can think about mistakes. You either have major mistakes or you either have micro mistakes. I've had both, throughout my career. But I think it's just taking inventory of what those are, and being able to really, truly reflect on them. And a lot of people talk about reflecting on your mistakes. And I think a lot of the time it's kind of BS, because you don't spend enough time, but you really got to dig. If you really want to reflect and learn from a mistake, you really got to dig deep, and you get to a place where you're rehashing some pretty rocky thoughts or rocky times that you had in your life.
Do you have a specific time or kind of obstacle you overcame that you feel is now like a foundational lesson that helps you thrive today?
Yeah, I think, there's a couple of instances in my life foundationally, I think, probably more set my mentality versus my, probably mostly set my mentality. So there was one where, when I was in high school, when I committed to Syracuse to play sports, my high school coach, the first thing he said to me, he's like, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Okay." And I didn't really realize, and he had a son that played there, and he's like, "You're going to go there. You're going to get no playing time. You're going to end up being miserable." He's like, "You're not good enough to go there." Which that was something that just became like a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. going into Syracuse and, for the rest of my senior year in high school from a lacrosse perspective. So that was a big moment for me that started to shape my mentality. I think the other thing was, trying to figure out the first pieces of my my internet connection's unstable.
That's all right. So sorry, just repeat then the mindset piece you're now trying to figure out. That's what cut out.
Yeah. So, so that I think the high school element really shaped my mindset in terms of how I think and having that chip on my shoulder, because I think it's important to have a chip on your shoulder, not one that you keep so heavily on your shoulders to where you hold grudges, but enough of a chip that kicks your ass a little bit. Then
to prove otherwise.
To prove otherwise to yourself, to the powers that be. To a lot of the time, you should be trying to prove things to yourself versus other people. And we can talk about that more. And I think the other thing I would say that helped shape is when I originally came to New York City, it was tough to navigate my career. It was like I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no connections. Literally none. The one interview I got when I got here was a disaster. That was through a connection. That was the only one. And I think navigating that, and then also that was a big mindset shift for me, because it just taught me to be more scrappy with the resources that I had. And then I think it was, it's interesting because a lot of these big companies, they hire people as contract workers, and there was a connotation, I think, when I initially started that of not being hired full time, which I also think, and I wasn't trying to be a consultant, so I was trying to get a full time job, right? So I think that helped drive me when I got within BlackRock was to just make sure I was working as hard as possible to earn that spot, and then building as many connections as possible to be able to navigate to the next phase.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like also you follow a method of proving to yourself what your capabilities are before you kind of dismiss the story that's no longer true. For example, like what your coach from high school, that method of tear down in order to build up is a commonly trained method for people to then step up into their greatness. Personally, I think it is, there's much better methods out there. I'm not going to knock it. It helps a lot of people out, right? And that chip you're talking about is to prove otherwise. But that method of tear down to build up, it comes from military, it comes from army-based coaching, it comes from coaches, sports coaches especially too, to get in your head so that you find that push to move faster, to move better, et cetera, and prove that voice wrong. But it can also have you hit a wall, and it can, and then also limit the exposure of who you talk to and what rooms you get into, because if you truly believe the tear down story, then you don't achieve. And what's awesome about the way you handled it, and as you share the story, is that you're able to build yourself up and prove otherwise, whether it was at Syracuse in sports and then, carried into your career of starting over. And I also think that the story of taking something temporary, like the temp job or the contract job you did, also gives you that hustle of, well, damn, I still need the full-time one. I need the full-time income. I'm only 22, 23 out here, right? It was the same story for me. I had to take a temp gig until and what I found the advantage of temp gigs was that it gave me local opportunity. Sometimes on a resume, and now that you're a hiring manager yourself, if it were someone that was right out of college that didn't have local experience, what are they going to bring to my company? There was all this judgment back then. It's different now that we're in a digital space and you can kind of Google someone and find out what they are all about,
It's interesting. And to your point, I think if you the tear down and build up thing, I completely agree. And I think it goes back to you need a chip. You don't want that chip to overtake you. And you want that chip to be in my opinion, more internal than externally driven. So you don't want to driven by other people's opinions. You want it driven by your own opinion to be able to prove to your own self.
Right.
You know, if you look external for those chips, that's going to end up what forces you into a wall.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think, you know, the comparison model, right? There's competition, which is valid, right? Like it's like, okay, that person is doing something that I also want to feel and do and like compete. But the comparison model, you know, when the chip is built because you're comparing yourself, that's then what kind of can tear someone down, you know?
Exactly.
And in regards to that mindset work that you've done and like where you are today, and now that you're building up, you know, your leadership chops, I know you've been a solid leader for a few years now. And I'm curious, you know, when you work with your team or you think about how you are even laterally with other leaders, like what's the impression that you hope you're leaving behind after you interact or work with others?
Yeah, you know, it's one, I think, you know, passionate about the work that you do, passionate about the work that the team does. I think if in any job, whether you work for yourself or you work for a company, I think if you lack passion, there's just no point. There's no point, you know, being there. I realize everyone needs a paycheck, but like, you know, go figure out a way to make a paycheck somewhere else if you really don't have a passion for it. I'm not necessarily, you know, the guy that's going to tell you to go follow your passion, meaning like find a balance between, you know, what you're passionate about, but you can also find a place that could help you. You know, you need money to live, so that could help you to make whatever you need to live. But I think it's just being passionate about the work that you do is one of the things I want people to walk away with after interacting with me from a leadership standpoint. And then the second thing is, I think just, you know, coming across and being understood as a student of my skill set or a student of my function. And whether that's through things I know or through things I would be willing to find out from a solution standpoint, I think that would be something where, you know, it's the figure it out mentality. And it's the idea of, you know, if there's a way we can make this work, it's probably not point A to point B. It's probably point A to C to F to G. But you know, we'll figure out a way to connect the dots.
Yeah, and I love that because it's clear. I mean, I've worked with you in the past, so I know that you always show up with an energy of commitment and passion and follow through. But the willingness is so key. You know, I love that across any leader who's also willing to learn from their team and the expertise that they bring, and as well as go find the answer, you know, to assist somebody in figuring it out, which is so great because that energy is so needed. And it also helps you represent your brand, you know, not only your personal brand, but you're part of the corporate culture, you know, when you move into a leadership role. And a lot of people don't realize that their state of mind, their being, how they show up, that energy also reflects that corporate brand. And in finding that alignment and attracting the right clients as well as team, you know, so that's really cool that that's what you lead with. I personally like to call it seeking out your fulfillment, you know, factor, like raising your fulfillment, because passion can sometimes feel like so nebulous. Like, what does that mean? You know, if you've never had like that passionate moment, you know, it's different for everyone. But fulfillment is something that everyone can achieve, and identifying, you know, what fills you up and figuring out a way to do that every day. Which is another topic I wanted to talk to about with you, because you not only are like a badass in branding and marketing and business and team building, but you also have a very specific outlook on health and wellness and self-care. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that side of your life and how that fills you up each day.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a super routine-oriented person. And it's funny, you know, you mentioned the tear down to build up and routine and stuff like that. And didn't grow up in a military family. So, but routine's a big aspect of my life. Health and wellness is, a big aspect of my life. So every morning I work out every morning. I'm up at 4:45. Chug some water, have the coffee, get to the gym, or go for a run. It's been something I probably started doing, and obviously we worked out a lot in college, but yeah, I probably started taking it. I took a little bit of a hiatus post college, but probably about 2-3 years ago, I started taking it really seriously, and it's not only helped. At this point, it's not even physical for me. I think it started out physical for me because I wanted to get in shape and I wanted to be, I just wanted to be in better shape. But it ended up transitioning very much to mentally. And it is, you hear all the BS about, exercise helps your mental stability up. Exercise helps your mindset. It really does. I mean, if it's gotten to a place where it's helped me mentally so much, from an energy standpoint, from keeping myself rooted in routine standpoint. And it's a routine that is easy enough to because it's enjoyable. It's easy enough to, build the routine into your plan. So I think that's been something I've been super, super passionate about over the past few years. And it was funny. I had some health issues a few years back, and that really ended up also, starting to think not only physically I need to worry about my health, but also mentally I need to worry about my health, because they're so closely integrated, and they're so tied together that if you're only focused on the physical, but you're not focused on learning new skills, meditating, getting your mindset right, then it's a super. And I was only focused on the physical for a long, long time. I've been really trying to focus on, which I still have a lot of work to. I'm a terrible meditator, but I'm trying to get better at it. I'm just continuing to do it, but it's one of those things where it's really about making sure the mental is in line with the physical.
Yeah, and that's great, because I subscribe to that model as well, and I had to learn the hard way. It took health crisis in my mid to late 20s based on stress and being in the wrong company and hitting a glass ceiling and all this stuff, and then realize, if I don't take care of me first, I can't give to anybody else. I can't extend myself when I need to, or overextend when I need to, if I'm not foundationally set every single day. And I always love doing it first thing in the morning too. And when it comes to meditation, so I was horrible, because my mind is always about task, what's next, chime down the list, right? I'm on that achiever mindset where it's hard to shut it down. So I will share with you my method. I actually have it recorded, so I'll share it with you, because it literally is 10 to 15 minutes, because that's the max that I can kind of sit. And it gives you this ability to kind of open up within, but get that mind right, and also be the receiver. Because a lot of the times too, when you have innate gifts like you do, and they start showing up in your daily life, in your work, in your relationships, especially now as you're building a family, these meditations, these moments to yourself of also being open to what, the universe is meant to give you kind of thing, not sound so woo woo, but it's kind of it gives you that openness of the what's next, especially in that creative mind that you have to have within marketing and branding and connection. That practice shifted my whole world, once I put it into play. So I'll share it with you, just so you have it. And I'll add it to the show notes for anybody listening that wants access to it as well, because it literally shifted everything. And I love that you're incorporating that, into your world.
I tried it. I tried to get into meditation a little while back, and it was an utter failure. And I disregarded it for a while, but I've been doing it a lot, at least every morning lately. And what I found was really I'd get up, I would spring into action so quickly without first, setting my foundation or grounding myself for the day. And a lot of the time I almost felt more stressed versus less stressed because I was like immediately jump into action mode. So even if it's that 3 to 5 minutes where I'm just like, okay, I'm up and I know what I need to do for the day, and I'm kind of getting my focus in, and then you're able to operate a lot more efficiently throughout the day. Yeah.
I love also when I trained with Tony Robbins, the priming exercise. So if you haven't checked out priming, you might really enjoy that because there's a very physical aspect to it that you can incorporate either before or after your workout. That since you have that routine as well. And I personally like to meditate actually after I have my hard workout because I'm like in that zone, that like post euphoric sweat zone. If you just want to and then so I do that actually to close out my workout practice, but then also set the intention for my work day, which is something else to look into. So I'll share his priming exercise with you as well, because I think both are something to try. And I'll tell anyone listening who hesitates with meditation or feels like it's stressful, then it's not right. That's not the right method for you. Concentration meditation creates so much stress for me. Don't tell me to sit there and think about the oceans and go and be in some field and I'm walking around. I'm like, no, I got things to do. Don't put me all the way out there, so that didn't work for me, that method. For some people it does, but and just keep introducing yourself to different methods until you find the right one that fits.
Yeah. I've been using recently the app Headspace. Which I think it's good because they don't try to force you to do anything. They kind of gently nudge you to certain places, and then if they'll, the meditation coach within the app, whether you go to that place or not is up to you. But it's never you got to concentrate on this or
right.
So it's helped. Using that app has definitely helped me be better about meditating and just chilling out in the morning.
I love it. That's such a great practice that more, people can incorporate. So it's a great tool and tip to give folks, which is cool. That's really great. So tell me, if you were to define what a badass is, how would you define it?
I would say a badass is equal parts confidence, humility, passion with zero ego. I think it's interesting. Just in recent months, I've been thinking a lot about as you start to interact with different people in your life and you start to interact with different clients, you think a lot about confidence versus ego. I think confidence helps. I think ego hurts. I think humility in having humility about what you're doing from a personal or professional standpoint is something that honestly took me a long time to get right. I think there were times in my life where I didn't have as much as I should have. Maybe age humbles you, and that's damn true. But it was one of those things where you got to have humility. It's got to be within your blood, and you got to be able to find it. If you don't feel like you have enough, and that it took me a long time to figure that out. So I think that's how I define a badass. But ego is a dangerous thing. It really, really is.
Yeah, when you lead with it, for sure, it can be detrimental. And I love that definition that you bring humility into it, because sometimes it takes the ego actually to push you further, maybe say something that might be uncomfortable, or, kind of get you over something, like through something. But it's the recognition that that wasn't right after the fact, or that maybe you went a little bit too far, because ego helps you with some of your lessons learned a little bit, to lead with it and to have that be your guiding force. It sounds like is what could be detrimental, as well as very isolating. That's when I think about the people that I've come across who lead with ego first, it immediately shuts me down from wanting to interact with them further. So I can only imagine if they're rubbing everybody that way, how are they able to connect, and build what they want?
I completely agree. And I think that's where the difference and the fine line, there is such a fine line between having a strong confidence and ego, because a strong confidence is something that how you carry yourself, confidence in the things that you say, confidence in the knowledge that you have, in the decisions that you make. And it's an unconscious balance that you have to play between, having that confidence within yourself, but not getting to that point where you're starting to cross the line and leading with the ego factor versus carrying the confidence factor.
Yeah. And I love to say that confidence is faith in action.
Yeah.
So you're right. Like it is that actionable word. It's like you show it. You can't, like, confidence is not something that is ever hidden. Like you're always putting it forward. So that's beautiful. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today and sharing a piece of your badass journey. And I know there's so much more to come for you. So hopefully we'll have another conversation to share with folks in, a few months' time. But I really just want to thank you. And as people desire to get in touch with you, learn about CION Investments, learn about Al Cavalieri, where would you like them to go? How would you like them to find you?
Instagram is probably the at Al Cavalieri is the channel these days. Though I'm starting to be more in love with LinkedIn again.
Mm-hmm.
But LinkedIn or Instagram are probably the two best channels to get in touch with me. But I also want to thank you for having me on the show. It was awesome to talk to you, and it's interesting as you tell these stories that you don't often think about them. So it's good to rehash them, and it's almost euphoric in a sense.
Yeah, I'm glad you feel like there's some benefit in sharing it, because I know our listeners are going to benefit from hearing your story, and it's been just so awesome to share with you with them. So thanks again, Al. We'll definitely talk soon.
All right, I'll see you. Thank you.